Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the lovely neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you find your podcast. We don't want you to miss an episode. Like our guest today is Michelle Travis. She is here to tell us about her wonderful children's book called My Mom Has Two Jobs. Speaking of wonderful children's books, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by The Present is a Gift, a wonderful children's book by Elhanan Ogorik. This is a beautiful book that teaches children focus and mindfulness through the observation of mindful animals practicing yoga. This book is a wonderful resource for parents and caregivers on how to raise children with an understanding of the importance of love, kindness, gratefulness, and respect, and learn some important information about the featured animals. It really is a wonderful book, and it is a Reading with Your Kids certified great read. It is available on Amazon. It's The Present is a Gift by Elhanan Ogorik. Joining us on the line right now from the Bay Area in California, she is the author of a book that I think is really, really important. It's called My Mom Has Two Jobs. Please welcome to the show author Michelle Travis. Michelle, how are you?
I'm great, Jed. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be part of your terrific show, and thank you so much for all that you do to support children's love of learning. It's really important work, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Well, thank you so very much. It is a really important thing for me. I love the fact that my wife and I were able to help our kids develop a love of learning and reading, and right now they're two very happy and successful young adults, and it was a joy. And this time we spent reading with our kids started a lifelong conversation that continues to this day with both of our kids and now with their significant others. So it was a wonderful gift that we gave ourselves. And I know that sitting down and reading My Mom Has Two Jobs would be a wonderful gift for any parents or caregivers to give to give to themselves and also their kids. So why don't you tell us all about the book?
Thank you. Well, My Mom Has Two Jobs is really written to be a celebration of working moms and working parents in general. The idea of two jobs, of course, is referring to a mom's parenting job, our most important job, taking care of our little loved ones. But the second job is our professional job, whatever it is that we go out and do outside of the house. So the idea of My Mom Has Two Jobs is to give kids an opportunity to really celebrate both of those roles that their moms play as their parent and as a professional, and to start seeing how those two things go together, and to allow kids to be really proud of the different roles that their parents and their moms in particular are playing both inside and outside of the home.
I think, there's a lot that we can talk about around this issue, and might as well just get the perhaps difficult one out of the way. There are a lot of parents out there who have to work to pay the bills. But there's also, I've heard people say, well, there are a lot of parents who are kind of selfish and that they're not staying home with their kids. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I think this is such an important conversation for us to be having, and it's one of the reasons that I wrote this book, because you're exactly right. People work outside the home for a lot of different reasons, right? One, of course, is to financially support their families. It's not really a choice, right? And others are working to fulfill important aspirations and to make a big impact in their communities. For all of those reasons, I think we should be celebrating the idea that you really can be both a committed and loving parent and at the same time be committed and passionate about another job. And so one of the goals of this book is really to sort of break down that idea that I think induces a lot of guilt in a lot of working parents, but to break down that idea that somehow it's a trade-off between the two. And so the idea of the book really sets up these pairs of moms and kids, and the kids are speaking in the books, and it comes from the kid's perspective, and the kid really talks about how proud they are both of what their mom is doing out in the world to make the world better and what their mom is doing to take care of them in a very special way. So one of my goals, my hopes, my dreams for this book is that it will help people accept the idea that you can actually bring the same love and passion and dedication both to your professional job and your parenting job, and one doesn't really take away from the other.
Yeah. I hope, too, it will help start a conversation about how we can help support working moms and working dads so that they are able to spend more time with their kids.
Yes. And that's really what brought me to this project as a law professor, which is my day job. This is a very unusual project for me to be writing a children's book. As a law professor, I spend most of my time advocating for ways that we might use the law to help really reduce the daily conflicts that we feel between work and family. So I write about things like paid parental leave and pregnancy discrimination laws and paid sick days, et cetera. And so that is in my hat as a law professor, but I think it's really important to be starting to think about that even earlier, right? To have it start becoming the norm that people have both of these roles, which will force us to think more about how can we set up our work lives, our workplaces to fit better for so many of us that are combining all of these different roles.
And one of the things, too, you brought up is talking about in the book, the child is really proud of what the mom is doing in the job that the mom has outside the house. One of the things that surprised me as my kids were growing up and I was getting to know their friends because we had the cool house and, so a lot of time, we'd have a house full of kids and we'd have a conversation with these kids and oftentimes I would ask, so what do you folks do? And I was amazed at how many kids couldn't tell me what their parents did. It's like, yeah, I know they go out and they go to work. And,
yes, and they spend some time on the phone and Yes, it's really interesting. That's one of my other hopes for this book is that it could be a platform for parents to sit down and have conversations with their kids about what it is that they do in their professional jobs and to spark some curiosity from kids to ask questions about what is it that you're doing when you leave during the day or when I'm at school. I think that allows kids to just have a much richer understanding of what their parents do and the roles that they play. And I think it also helps for parents to be able to share that piece of their lives with their kids. So I'm hoping that this book can be a conversation starter so that we have fewer kids who, when you ask them that question, say, I'm not really sure.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so important because it's, I think having conversations with our kids, when we talk about what we're doing as adults and what our jobs are and talking about, I really love this. This is why I get into it. I'm not really crazy about it. I want to do something else. It's a great jumping off point to help help us start talking to our kids about their dreams and encouraging them to have dreams and how they can make those dreams a reality.
Yes, those conversations are so important. And to get kids to start thinking about what things are important to me, what am I passionate about, what sparks my interest. And when they hear their parents talking about that, as well as the struggles or the things they want to avoid in their own jobs, I really think, Jed, you're onto something. I think this really gets kids to start percolating about those kinds of important questions for themselves and start to assess what are the paths that might be a good fit for me and get excited about that.
Yeah. I've talked about this on the podcast in the past. A few years ago, I read a study about how kids with dreams are happier and they do better in school. They're better behaved. They're more likely to make their dreams come true. And I thought that was really fascinating, and I had never thought about it. And then, so for a couple of months after that, at my educational magic shows, I would just ask the kids, "Hey, how many of you guys have dreams? How many of you guys are thinking, when I grow up, I want to do X, Y, or Z?" And I was amazed that there's so many kids who didn't have dreams. I think at the most, I had half the kids at one presentation raise their hands. And the other half, no, I'm not thinking about that. And so it was a good way for me to encourage them to start dreaming and to start thinking about these things. But I think it's real important for us as parents to help get that going with our kids, and to help encouraging kids to start dreaming, and let them know that it's okay to dream, no matter if they're a boy or a girl or what their race is, and also to let them know it's okay that their dream changes once or twice or 1,000 times.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with you. I think it's so important, and it's okay to let them know that your dreams have changed along the way, right? And that dreams can change, but without thinking about it and asking yourself that question, it's hard to get really inspired to find the passion that you need to pick a path. So yes, I agree with you. And so one of the things I'm hoping for with this book too is in just having them have images of women in a whole very wide different range of roles, which then will trigger conversations with their parents about the jobs that their parents have had or are having right now, that it can start those conversations with little sparks of dreams that you're describing, that just give those aspirations and those that ability to imagine yourself possibly being an engineer, possibly being a doctor, possibly being, fill in the blank. And I think those are just really important jumping off points for us in our conversations with our kids.
I like too that you're encouraging parents to talk about the jobs, plural, that they've had. And it's a great way of, I hear these stories of young people getting out of college and immediately wanting to be the CEO of GE. And it's like, and not realizing, first you start, delivering newspapers, and then you do this, and then it's a progression.
Yes. And it's interesting that you say that. In choosing the jobs that I wanted to highlight in this book, which was one of the challenging decisions, right? Because with a children's book, you have a limited amount of space. So there were a limited amount of professions and jobs that I could select. But among the various things that I thought about, one of the things that was important for me was to include some jobs that kind of we're across the range of our economic spectrum, from your starter jobs to your aspirational jobs. So, for example, the book includes a mom who's a doctor and also includes a mom who's a waitress. And that was important to me for a number of reasons. One is what you're talking about, right? We need to understand that you put in hard work in a lot of different ways. You don't just become the CEO. And also important, I think, to have kids realize that no matter what kind of work your parent is doing, it's important work. If it's work that is helping support your family and support your dreams, that's important work. And there's something that really, I think, bonds together all working parents, no matter what kind of job they have, right? The joys, the struggles, the aspirations. So that was something that I was thinking about in the challenging task of selecting which jobs I wanted to include.
And that's beautiful, and I love that. Every single job is worthy. It needs to be respected. When someone goes out there and they put in, you mentioned waitresses. Waitresses, boy, they work real hard. It's a lot harder to be a waitress than it is to be a podcast host.
Or a law professor.
Well, and now that you brought that up, I have to ask my Augie the Wonder Dog is here, and he's looking at me. He's like wondering why I haven't asked this question yet. A law professor, children's book author. How did that happen?
Yes, it is not a typical path. Normally, I'm writing for lawyers and judges and policymakers. The spark for this book actually came when I was returning to my job as a law professor after taking maternity leaves with my two daughters. And at that moment, when I was returning to my outside job, I was having a lot of conflicting emotions, like I think a lot of us do as parents. I was feeling a little sad and guilty about leaving my kids, but I also was looking forward to getting back to my job and teaching future lawyers, which is a really satisfying position. So at that moment when I was finishing my maternity leaves, I was searching for children's books to sit down and have the conversations that we're talking about with my own kids, right? To help them understand what it means for me to be going back to work, to help them feel proud of the work that I do, to help them really understand that just because I have this other job doesn't mean that I love or care for them any less. And I really struggled to find children's picture books that I thought had this message that was very positive and inspiring about working moms. So it was at that moment, Jed, that I told myself, I'm going to write that book. Uh-huh. And it took me quite a few years of juggling my own 2 jobs to actually get it done. But it kept nagging at me. And as I talked to so many other women and men who were going through this juggle as working parents and trying to have a platform for these conversations, I finally got around to saying, you know what, I'm going to write that book. And so I'm really happy that My Mom Has 2 Jobs is actually the product of, I think, that struggle I was having really at that moment when I was transitioning back.
I have to ask, and now you're talking about preparing future lawyers, and that's an incredibly important job. And so I know there's one mindset, you're like, oh yes, I'm mentoring these young people, and they're going to go out and they're going to make a difference in the world in this way. But now as a children's author, I wonder, do you sit down and you think about the fact that, hey, there's going to be a family, and my book is going to start a conversation within so many families about these important topics. What's that like? What's going through your mind when you think about that?
Yeah, it's such a daunting and humbling thought, Jed. I think, I think anyone who's written a children's book, when you step back and think about the audience that's going to be reading this, which is by far the most important people in the world to be reading anything that you produce, right? Kids who are really at that moment have that wide open brain, and you get to step into that important space. So I actually found it much more daunting than talking with law students who already have framed ideas about what it is they want to do with their law degree, and ideas of the world, and ideas of gender roles, so I found it actually much more much bigger responsibility in many ways. But I have to say, it's been such a joy and a delight to be able to step out of my law school classrooms, which I love. My students are always inspiring me, but to actually have an opportunity to head into preschool classes and book fairs and talk to such a very different audience of kids who are just so excited to ask questions and learn and imagine and grow. It's been a very fun process.
Did it take a lot of mental gymnastics for you to go from, you're a law professor and you've written, I think it's at least a dozen pretty serious articles and that have been published in law reviews around the country. Did it take some mental gymnastics to go from writing kind of fact-based? I know you need your imagination to see where the law can go and where it shouldn't go, but then to shut that off and to just use your imagination and talk in a voice that's accessible, that young kids can access.
Yes, Jen, I'm laughing because the process was a challenge to use an entirely different part of my brain, which was part of the joy of this project. But I am not used to writing in prose that you speak aloud, right? And I hope that this book is something that parents will read aloud to their kids, right? It's geared for little kids. And so I spent a lot of time reading the pages out loud to myself in my office, which I don't typically do as a law professor. And I have 2 daughters who were definitely an audience for me to test out things. But in thinking about language and descriptions, particularly about jobs that can be very complicated jobs in ways that very young kids could understand was a challenge. So to think about how do I describe what it is that an engineer does to a 4-year-old, right? How do I describe what a lawyer does or a pilot does, right, to a 4-year-old was really a fun challenge because it forced me to get to the essence, the core of these ideas. And I will say the other thing that helped me, Jed, in this very challenging process to go from someone who's been thinking like a lawyer for a lot of years to someone who's dabbling with being a children's book author is I want to thank the illustrator. As you know, illustrators do so much to bring our ideas alive. And my fabulous illustrator, Natalie Losova, with beautiful watercolors, I think helped me find a voice that worked for these fabulous kids.
So I'm just wondering if, like, the first draft of the book, someone sat down and said, yeah, okay, for a third-year law student, this is a wonderful bedtime story, but...
Yes, absolutely. I had to recalibrate a little bit with use of vocabulary and length of sentences, for example. But I find that going through this process actually in some ways has helped me communicate with my law students better because really we all communicate better when we strip it down to the heart of the matter. So yeah, that was definitely part of the process.
Now, I know you're working on a new project for families. Tell us a little bit about that book, please.
Yeah, so the next book actually is not a children's book. Dads for Daughters is an adult book, and it's really a call to action to dads of daughters to become inspired to join our fight for women's equality. I interview so many inspired dads who have learned from their daughters and grown from their daughters to be excited about trying to figure out how to make the world better and fairer and safer and more equal for girls and women in their lives. So that's where that book is headed.
Well, that would be a great subject for us to talk about when that is available. In the meantime, tell everybody where they can find out more about My Mom Has Two Jobs and find out more about Michelle Travis.
Thank you. My author website is michelletravis.net. And so that has information about my work both as a law professor and My Mom Has Two Jobs and Dads for Daughters. My Mom Has Two Jobs is also available on Amazon. And you can also learn more about my work as a law professor at my faculty website at the University of San Francisco School of Law.
Well, I think you need to update the book. It's because you have 3 jobs right now. You know, you're children's author, law professor, and, of course, the most important job being a mom.
Thanks.
We've had such a wonderful time speaking to the author of My Mom Has Two Jobs, Michelle Travis. Michelle, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Thank you, Jed. I really appreciate it. And thank you again for all that you're doing to inspire reading and the joy of reading for all of our kids.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be the author of Queen of Physics, the debut picture book from our guest, Teresa Robeson. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Hey, if you are the author of a wonderful children's book, we would love to have you as a guest on the show. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy, and it is absolutely a wonderful way to tell thousands and thousands of people about your fantastic children's book. All you need to do is to go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, click on the contact button, let us know about your great book. We will let you know the next easy steps. We want to thank the people who made today's show so very, very wonderful. Of course, we want to thank our guest, Michelle Travis. Be sure to check out My Mom Has Two Jobs. We also want to thank our sponsor, Elhanan Agoric. Please check out The Present is a Gift. It's a wonderful, wonderful book and a wonderful gift for your children. I also want to thank my producer, Fatima Khan. Be sure to check out Fatima's blog at readingwithyourkids.com. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support that she gives me, and I want to thank you. Thank you so much for being part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family, and of course, thank you so much for making the world a better place by taking the time to read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.